Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Shri Radhe Golokananda Bhagwan ki Jai.
Jai. So we'll finish the chapter this tonight. I think we only have 4 more verses.
Recording in. We'll start at 13.32.
Starting at 13.32.
Anaditva nirguntva Paramatmayam avyayah Sharirasto api konteya na karoti na lipyate. Those with the vision of eternity can see that the imperishable soul is transcendental, eternal, and beyond the modes of nature. Despite contact with the material body, O Arjun, the soul neither does anything nor is entangled.
So I'll note before we begin here that these last 4 verses really emphasize the separateness of the soul from the body, and how we have to understand that the body is acting, but the soul is not contaminated. So here's the purport. A living entity appears to be born because of the birth of the material body, but actually the living entity is eternal. He is not born, and in spite of his being situated in a material body, he is transcendental and eternal. Thus, he cannot be destroyed. By nature, he is full of bliss. He does not engage himself in any material activities. Therefore, the activities performed due to his contact with material bodies do not entangle him. So what's being described here? The soul is not entangled. Yes, Bill.
Right, this is one of the hardest ones to incorporate in daily life, because everything we do, we're associated with what we do, and we identify with what we do, but really who we are is our awareness, and the awareness doesn't do anything, and it just observes, and it's it's one wonders, the dispassion that some monks can cultivate after years of practice. They watch themselves eating, drinking, and as enjoying, not enjoying, just this witness awareness is very powerful, and that's really this verse really speaks to that as a spiritual practice.
Yes, but it's dynamic also, because we have to always be thinking about how we're not connected to the body, but we do have activities in the world, and this is remember that the person being spoken to is Arjuna, who is very active in the world. So although being a renunciate, a monk, is very powerful, if we aren't able to be a monk because of our psychophysical nature, then we can also still engage ourselves in this sort of thinking by understanding through the realization we get by chanting the holy name and by engaging in Krishna consciousness, that the body is just a temporary manifestation that covers our real consciousness. And that when the body is engaged in different, it's in different modes, goodness, passion, or ignorance, it does things that are really not the soul's doing at all. It's the conditioned living entity under the control of the modes of material nature. And therefore, according to how we're conditioned, we engage in all sorts of activities which we think are being done out of total free will, but actually are being done highly conditioned by our personal desires and our senses, which are attuned to these desires. Johnny wants to speak.
If we have the understanding that we are the soul and we want to be the soul, which is what we are, and we are in a body, and the body has to do so many things like sit down or eat or write something, then we transform by consciousness, by a change of consciousness, we transform activities from being bound by the modes of material nature into liberating activities if we devote everything to the service of the Supreme Lord. If we have to eat, we're eating prasadam. And if we're listening to music, we're listening to sacred music, bhajan, kirtan. In other words, all the activities that we're performing can be made into sacrifice, made sacred, if we realize that the body is bound by the modes of material nature, but we are not necessarily, when we choose to engage everything in the service of the Supreme Lord. That's a real position, actually.
Yeah, but I think the interesting part is that so even though the soul is not entangled, it's not attached, right? It's eternal. But the birth after birth, I think the next birth which one takes place is depending on the karmas being done by the material body, isn't it?
Yes.
So
yeah, if we identify with a material body, then we have karma that will take us to another material body.
right, and
if we devote everything to the Supreme Lord, then we're not creating karma.
Then we won't create karma, yeah.
Not only we don't create karmas, we've mentioned this before, not only we don't create karmas, but we become more and more purified.
You were saying, Gajendra, you had one more point to make?
yeah, and I was just saying that's very true. But I think the important point is like still, I mean, there's so many births which one takes place, right? Even in Mahabharata, when Lord Krishna says that Arjuna also has taken so many births, one after another, right? And he did not remember any of these. So there is like, what is this relation between the soul and different materialistic body, right? Because once it gets conditioned with the materialistic body, it's the karma which is being done by the material body. And yes,
I think we can refer to the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, to verse number 20.
okay.
And in that verse, Krishna says, "For the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being." So he's always here. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. And Prabhupada goes on to say that he talks about the different transformations of a body, which are that it's born, it grows, it remains for some time, it produces some byproducts, children, it gradually dwindles, and then it vanishes. But the soul, these bodies just vanish. I mean, they literally just vanish. They will be burned or buried or whatever. They will no longer exist. The soul, however, does not go through such changes. The soul is not born, but because he takes on a material body, the body takes its birth. The soul does not take birth there, and the soul does not die. Anything which has birth also has death. And because the soul has no birth, he therefore has no past, present, or future. So the interesting point that you're making, Gajendra, is that Arjuna Krishna says, you've had many, many births. And I can remember, both you and I, we've been together, I can remember all of them, but you cannot, Arjuna. So what is going on here?
Yeah.
Prabhuji, I think what is also the situation is there is the subtle body, the mind. So regardless the physical body disappears, the subtle body, the mind continues to go with the soul. So whatever
Yes.
that subtle body mind has desired, accordingly there is the physical body manifestation. So the important point I feel that the material energy of the mind continues to envelop the soul, so the true nature, eternal bliss of the soul is hidden because of the material mind, which goes from body to body to body and is attached to the
Yes, very
soul.
good point.
Yeah, but the interesting part is that relationship with the soul of the same shuttle body, irrespective of whatever the gross body is continuous.
Yes.
So what,
So you have to
what
purify the
happens
subtle
is
body, the mind.
the subtle body is the mind, is the intelligence. It's three elements: mind, intelligence, and sense of identity. And that is the problem. What is our identity? If we identify ourselves as the body, then the mind and the intelligence will be pursuing that process. And so the body will be manifested again and again and again. But if the sense of identity is, I am not the body, I am eternally a spirit soul in connection with the Supreme Lord, I'm a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, then at that point, the whole outlook changes. And all the activities performed by somebody who does not anymore identify with the body become spiritual. That's the process. So it's mind, it's intelligence, and ahankara. Ahankara is this false ego, thinking aham kara, I am the doer. We're not the doer. As long as we consider ourselves the doer, then our mind, our intelligence will be in function, will be assisting this false concept of identity. And that's what creates new bodies.
I have a question on the top of that, though, is Arjuna is told by Krishna in the fifth verse of the 4th chapter, the personality of God had said, many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot, O subduer of the enemy. It almost seems like he's saying you've had material bodies. And that it's not true, but someone could even say, well, that means Krishna might have had a material body. But we have to understand here that Krishna certainly didn't have a material body because he can remember all his births or appearances, really. But why does Arjuna go through this process? And the reason he goes through this process, he's not going through the process because he's got material desires or he's got some sort of desire to enjoy the material world. He's going birth after birth to be with Krishna, birth after birth. Every time Krishna appears, Arjuna appears with him. And therefore, it's a service he's doing, but because of Arjuna is being meshed in the service, it's in contact with the material world. He's therefore has this symptom of where he's not remembering the previous births. But his service to Krishna is his goal, and therefore it's not an ordinary sort of birth after birth.
And we have to remember that Krishna remembers everything because he is the source of everything. But we are tiny sparks. So Arjuna is a spark of the Supreme Lord. And because he is a spark, like all of us are sparks, we forget. The Supreme Lord never forgets, but we forget. From body to body, we don't remember the previous body.
Wow, Bill, you really got us going here.
Yeah. One more comment is that we forget our past lives. We forget our dreams in the morning. And I think it has a similar part of the design is that it intensifies the lessons that we learn here when we take a fresh start each time, even though we're not taking a fresh start each time. And we take the game much more seriously when we think we're playing for keeps. And when otherwise it's a lot like taking a novel and flipping to the back right away to find out who did it. It short circuits the drama.
Yeah, I mean, the other important point is like, what Krishna tells Arjuna that, even in the war, all those things have already happened. Like he shows him that all those things are happening or have already happened.
Right.
So everything which is going to happen has already happened. Right?
But our own journey in spiritual life is that we need to go through a process by which we come to an understanding that we are, even if we can't remember our births, that we are living birth after birth. And it's so much so that, you see in Chaitanya Leela that the associates of Lord Chaitanya, they're all associates of Krishna in the spiritual world. But for the most part, they don't actively remember those positions by their previous nature in Krishna Leela. I mean, there are some. That's out of time. And the fact is that they may sometimes have some remembrance, but the fact of the matter is that we are when we come in contact with this material world. It changes our ability to understand the eternal because we're in time and the spiritual world is out of time. But we have to, as Bill was saying, learn our lessons. There is the famous song by George Harrison where there's one line, with every mistake we must surely be learning. So we must learn from our foibles in this world and then take up a spiritual process.
We learn if we're intelligent enough to apply that knowledge to further growth. But many people go over the same problems again and again and again without learning anything. But the most important thing is not just to learn about our mistakes, but actually go beyond that to identify ourselves with our spiritual nature.
Yeah, but who is getting the punishment and reward and all that work after birth, right?
What is it? Who's getting the punishment?
Like law of karma, right? Who is getting the?
Well, the soul is experiencing punishment in body after body, or sometimes reward. But the rewards are punishment if you see them also in context with eternity. But the soul experience, it's kind of like the soul sitting here in a body, and the body is like it's an interface with the material world. The soul can't interface with the material world because the soul is spiritual. So you got this body with nerves and senses, and it kind of touches the world, feels the world, and feels all this stuff. And the soul identifying itself with the body thinks, oh, it's me. It's like in a car. Somebody smashes in your car and you go, you hit me. No, you didn't hit me at all. You hit my vehicle. But I'm so enmeshed that I identify with my body, the car, that when you hit, it's me, but it's not me. It's just the vehicle that we're riding around in.
And you get the car based on your karma, right? Depending on.
Yeah, you do, exactly. So at the time of death, if you have no desires at all, then you don't have to get another car in this material world. You can just there's no material desires. That's correct. But if you're still in the material karma, depending on how much you've saved up in karmic credits, good credits, you can either get a Mercedes or you can get a used Fiat. Depending. And used Fiats aren't worth much.
I want to add one thing, Prabhuji. It's that remembrance and forgetfulness comes from Krishna. It's his mercy. It's one of his mercy.
Yes.
Sarvasya chaham vriddhi sanavishtu.
Yes, 15:15. For me comes from knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. Correct. And all the Vedas teach us to know Krishna. Let's go to the next verse. That's the purpose, yeah.
Prabhuji, there was a comment made by Mataji where she was that we should live with an understanding that we are soul. I totally agree. We understand, I understand it quite quite to an extent. Just wanted Mataji, if you can expand a little bit more, if we have a natural a regular day, right? So uh, if I think that I'm a soul, then how would be the a typical day? What would we doing or thinking, or how should we perceiving things, reacting?
That's a, that's a very good question. And one thing is to have the understanding that we are the soul, and something else is to realize that we are the soul. In other words, the understanding is to know about us being the soul. And the realization is knowing that we are the soul, knowing it. So in order to come to the point of understanding with realization, not just a theory, but actual experience, then we need to become more and more purified. And in order to become more and more purified, we chant the Hare, we read the Srimad Bhagavatam, we read the Bhagavad Gita, we try to associate as much as possible with like-minded individuals like we're doing this evening, for devotees, all of you devotees, all of us devotees, and take the guidance of the Guru at the right time, whenever that happens, to be guided by the person who has deep, deep understanding and deep realization and gets to know us very well and can guide us individually. That's how it works.
Okay. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji.
Text 33.
Yatha sarvagatam soksham adakasham nopalipyate sarvatra avastito dehe tatha atmano palipyate. The sky, due to its subtle nature, does not mix with anything, although it is all pervading. Similarly, the soul situated in Brahma vision does not mix with the body, though situated in that body.
Purport. The air enters into water, mud, stool, and whatever else is there. Still, it does not mix with anything. Similarly, the living entity, even though situated in varieties of bodies, is aloof from them due to its subtle nature. We're talking about the soul here. Therefore, it is impossible to see with the material eyes how the living entity is in contact with this body and how he's out of it after the destruction of the body. No one in science can ascertain this.
The soul is described to be 1/10,000th the tip of a hair, which is a nice metaphorical way of understanding that it's very, very intangible. But actually, if we actually thought that it was, if you could cut a hair, tip of a hair into 10,000 pieces and took that out and tried to find the soul to measure against it, that's not the way, really what it means. Because really what it means is that the soul is undetectable. Because it's spirit, and we're looking at everything we're looking at as matter. That's why Krishna comes in the form of the deity in the temple, in the Archa Vigraha. Because we, right now, if Krishna were right before us, or anything of the spiritual world right before us, we don't have the instruments to ascertain that. We cannot see. But Krishna, he can turn matter into spirit and spirit into matter. And therefore he can appear as the Archa Vigraha, the deity form in the temple, which, a scientist might be able to say, well, that's marble or brass or whatever, but that's not what it really is, because Krishna has become there. He's been brought to that deity by the prayers of his devotees. And therefore he's appearing that way as merciful so we can see him with the present equipment we have. Our equipment is just not set up to see spirit.
Yeah, one interesting way to understand this Prabhuji in digital world is like, we have this whole Wi-Fi equipment, and then it doesn't reach in all the rooms or in the next house and all that. But if you put the extension, then you can get the Wi-Fi connection. So like you have the Archid form, deities form everywhere. It's like Wi-Fi extension. So that's why deities are so real. So,
Well, you're using the modern 21st century
yeah.
example. Prabhupada used the 20th century example. He called it like a post office box. That if you have the post office sets up authorized boxes. There are no post office boxes anymore practically, but at one time when there were post office boxes, if you lived in some place in town and you wanted to post a letter, you could go to the post office box and put your letter in that post office box because it was recognized by the post office itself. Now, if you were crazy and you said, well, I'm going to get a box and put it in my backyard and paint it like a post office box, you could post your letters forever and they wouldn't go anywhere because it wasn't authorized and they had no connection with the post office. So in the same way, the deities are authorized by the central post office. So, that they're like, they are the only way that we can interact. So the Wi-Fi example, of course, is a better example for the 21st century because no one even knows what a post box is anymore.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry where the source is as long as you can connect to the internet and you see the extension.
But you want to have the highest speed connection as possible. Therefore, what you need to have is really good Wi-Fi. And that Wi-Fi comes from chanting 16 rounds a day and chanting Hare Krishna. That's the best Wi-Fi.
And there is another interesting thing, like if we see in the world, like, another material thing is needed for the other material thing to run or to operate. A car needs a fuel needs some other mechanism of to be extraction and purification. But it is amazing and you just wonder that such big bodies are operating because of a very non-material, spiritual, infinitesimal object, which is, it's not even object, because if it is object, it can be perceived. It is the subject, it is the soul, which is so infinitesimal, and yet it is kind of, getting into material things and giving it life.
Where the soul,
It's the battery.
yeah, I was going to say the soul.
It is the battery that operates the whole machine. That's correct.
Yeah.
It's called what is it? Duracell. No.
Duracell.
What's the other one? There's one. The Energizer. Yeah, it's the Energizer.
But the thing is that this Energizer battery also is not material. This is something.
Exactly. It's
That's
transcendental,
what
and you can put it. You can put it into unlimited toys, one after another. And you never have to recharge it.
Yeah, like you need something non-material to make material work. It's not like car where you need a gasoline to make it work. You need something which you cannot touch, which you cannot smell, and that is giving all the qualities to this body. I mean, it's just so fascinating that, wow,
It is like a driver in the car. The car will not go anywhere unless there is a driver.
Yeah.
One thing.
Okay, Bill, let me say one thing. Then Prabhupada uses the example, life comes from life. No one can create life out of matter. Matter is coming, it's reversed. Matter comes from life, and not life coming from matter. Okay, Bill?
Yes, I think that translating Akasha as the sky is a bit of a simplification, I think, maybe to make things more understandable. But in Vedanta philosophy, Akasha is really the fifth element, pervading ether, which is somewhat different than air, because air really does mix in with everything. but the ether is different.
They used to call it ether.
You should call it ether.
It's space.
Space.
It's space.
Call it space, yeah. Because I mean, for many years in physics, they were thinking that there was a luminescent, an ether filling the vacuum in order for light to pass through. But now we know that that's not true. But the idea that space itself, which is a very active medium, is really does translate over into this. Something that does, yeah.
Prabhupada, well, it's Prabhupada's way to translate it. Prabhupada oftentimes use the word sky to mean space or an environment. He would talk about the spiritual sky. And of course, the spiritual sky isn't up there. It's, we like to think that way, but it's not necessarily up there. And the material sky is not just the sky we see, but it's the whole cosmos. So Prabhupada uses sky sometimes in this very broad way. So we should understand cosmos. We should understand space or ether. Akash.
The word here is akash.
Yeah, he said that.
Means space.
Space, yeah. Prabhupada translates that sky. He uses that word sky for akash often. Okay. Any more questions? Before we do this one, I just want to do a disclaimer on the purport, is that for those of us who are very scientific, when we hear this purport, we're going to say the universe certainly has more than one sun. Prabhupada's using his example more, we could say the solar system or the Vedic conception of a Brahmanda. So let's not try to get too much into the fact that we've got zillions of galaxies with zillions of stars. For this purport is instructive, but the astronomy will not agree 100% with what the Hubble telescope has shown. Okay.
I think the scope is, scope is this universe probably. So that's why.
Yeah.
यथा प्रकाशयति एकः कृतस्नं लोकमिमं ब्रवीह क्षेत्रं क्षेत्री तथा कृतशनं प्रकाशयति भारत. O son of Bharat, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. Yeah, Sejal Mataji.
There are various theories regarding consciousness. Here in Bhagavad Gita, the example of the sun and the sunshine is given. As the sun is situated in one place but is illuminating the whole universe, so a small particle of spirit soul, although situated in the heart of this body, is illuminating the whole body by consciousness.
Thus, consciousness is the proof of the presence of the soul, as sunshine or light is the proof of the presence of the sun. When the soul is present in the body, there is consciousness all over the body. And as soon as the soul has passed away from the body, there is no more consciousness. Hare Krishna.
Savitaji.
This can be easily understood by any intelligent man. Therefore, consciousness is not a product of the combination of matter. It is the symptom of the living entity. The consciousness of the living entity, although qualitatively one with the supreme consciousness, is not supreme.
Mayur?
Mayur is driving.
Oh, okay. Bill?
Bill?
Oh, okay. Because the consciousness of one particular body does not share that of another body, but the supersoul, which is situated in all bodies, as the friend of the individual soul, is conscious of all bodies. That is the difference between supreme consciousness and individual consciousness.
Yeah. Let's see. Any questions or thoughts here?
Yeah, it looks like, there's in reality there is a sun with every earth, or every there is sun. The sun, we see there is only one sun, but in reality, with every soul there is the sun or the super soul.
Well, the idea is that being given here is that the sunshine illuminates the entirety of the material world. For this example, we're just going to go with this. It's all being lit by the sun. So the soul lights up the entirety of the body. And that's what keeps the body going. That's why they have these near-death experiences, because the soul really doesn't leave. Everything's, in other words, the soul is still attached to that body. So somehow or other, even after tremendous injuries or some sort of catastrophe, the soul may start going, but it doesn't go. So they can then recover. But if the soul leaves, then the body collapses. Now, it looks as though the body itself is the reason the soul leaves, because the kidneys fail and therefore you fill up with poisons, etc. But actually, the soul, sometimes people stay alive under the most strange and unique circumstances for a long time because the soul doesn't leave. It's when the soul leaves, that's when the body dies, because the battery is gone and there's no more energy. As soon as the soul is passed from the body, there is no more consciousness. And therefore, some scientists are trying to understand the nature of consciousness. When does it happen? At what point? Well, we know that consciousness comes before everything else. Without consciousness, nothing else happens. Anything else?
About the super soul and soul, the soul only knows the kshetra, while the super soul knows his kshetrajna, he knows all the other souls.
Right. So therefore, if one meditates and thinks that he is the super soul, then that is a misunderstanding, because easily, as the Prabhupada says, any intelligent man can understand this. Where's your super consciousness? I mean, even persons get in very high levels of meditation, and they may have some experiences, but are they conscious of all bodies everywhere at all time? If they aren't, then they cannot claim to be the super consciousness. Last verse, so we can finish the chapter and start fresh next week.
क्षेत्र क्षेत्रज्ञयोरेव अंतरं ज्ञानचक्षुषा भूत प्रकृति मोक्षं च ये विदुर्यान्ति ते परम्. Those who see with the eyes of knowledge the difference between the body and the knower of the body, and can also understand the process of liberation from bondage in material nature, attain to the supreme goal. Mukesh?
The purport of this 13th chapter is that one should know the distinction between the body, the owner of the body, and the super soul. One should recognize the process of liberation as described in verses 8 through 12. Then one can go on to the supreme destination. A faithful person should at least first have some good association to hear of God and thus gradually become enlightened. Hare Krishna.
Kunali?
If one accepts a spiritual master, one can learn to distinguish between matter and spirit, and that becomes the stepping stone for further spiritual realization. A spiritual master, by various instructions, teaches his students to get free from the material concept of life. For instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, we find Krishna instructing Arjuna to free him from materialistic considerations.
Manish Prabhu?
One can understand that this body is matter. It can be analyzed with its 24 elements. The body is the gross manifestation, and the subtle manifestation is the mind and psychological effect. And the symptoms of life are the interaction of these features. All over and above these, but over and above this, there is a soul, and there is also a super soul. The soul and the super soul are two. This material world is working by conjunction of the soul and the 24 material elements.
Shiva?
One who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as this combination of the soul and material elements, and can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul, becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. These things are meant for contemplation and for realization, and one should have a complete understanding of this chapter with the help of the spiritual master. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So,
Ends the chapter 30.
let's end the Bhaktivedanta, the purports to the 13th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of nature, the enjoyer, and consciousness. And I know it's late, so just to say one thing is that Prabhupada emphasizes the importance of knowledge and having knowledge to understand the situation of what the soul is and how the soul exists in the body and how the super soul is the overseer of everything, and that the distinction between the body and the soul, this knowledge is very important. And Prabhupada says here at the end, he says that one who can see the constitution of the whole material manifestation as a combination of the soul and material elements can also see the situation of the Supreme Soul becomes eligible for transfer to the spiritual world. This is the knowledge that we need to have in order to engage in Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada says we need to contemplate this, and we need to have a teacher to help us. So this chapter is technical, but this technical knowledge is not something that we should just think, well, I'd rather listen to pastimes than just pastimes of Krishna with the gopis, or Krishna with his cowherd boy friends, or these different wonderful stories about, Varaha killing Hiranyaksha. These are all wonderful stories and they're instructive, but behind it all is the foundation. Your computer works, has software, but it's the hardware that we have to understand how that hardware works to produce the effects that we understand as something interesting on our computer. We have to understand the hardware of Krishna consciousness in order to really appreciate the pastimes and Krishna's activities. Any takeaways or questions before we have our kirtan? Lively discussion. I guess that means
it's a lot easier to say these things and understand them at some level until you're wrapped up in a disaster, or someone close to you dying, or you're dying yourself. When that drama hits, it's very heavy, and it's extraordinarily easy to lose this perspective in the heat of the event. Yes. Even with regular training, it's the nature of the beast.
That's why the pilots practice in the simulators over and over again. So when it actually happens, they don't freak out and they don't make a mistake. So we have to practice every day in the simulator, which is chant our rounds, go to the programs and do these things, read the books, so that when that disaster happens, we know how to fly the airplane. So let's just keep practicing.
And it is also from the concept of knower and the known. If we start from body and backtrack, then we will realize that we all are one, connected with the Supreme Soul.
Well, let's be careful about one. One means one in purpose with Krishna, just like the close associates in Vrindavan. They are one with their love, but we are, this isn't, I am you and you are me and we are all together, like the song the Beatles sang. We really have distinction. We're one in love with Krishna ultimately, but not one. Just be careful with the one.
Individuality is essential. We cannot change ourselves for somebody else or merge all together into a blob. We are eternally individuals.
Right, but all individuals are powered by the same super soul.
That's true.
It's because we are all spiritual beings.
Yeah.
Some parts of this we know, but we are completely individual. It's like you look at the grass, and each blade of grass is completely different from the others, completely. Or the leaves on the tree, each leaf is unique. So we are all unique, individually unique.
Yes.
Like different cars manufactured in the same plant.
What was that?
Say like different cars, but even though manufactured in the same plant.
Different car manufactured in the same plant. Yeah.
Right. That's good.
So we have to get our oil changed to the same place. Okay, so let's stop there. And thanks. This was a lively discussion tonight, and everybody had some really nice points. And we can all learn when we hear these nice discussions.
Yeah.
And next week it's 15th.
Yeah.
Next week, 14th chapter. I just said next week we'll start the 14th chapter.
Yes.
Good evening.
Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunj Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunj Bihari Jai Gopi Jan Vallabha Jai Giri Bardhari Jai Gopi Jan Vallabha Jai Giri Bardhari Jai Radha Madhava Jai Kunj Bihari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Jai Kunja Bihari
All right. Happy
That was
Ekadashi.
really nice.
Ekadashi.
Very, very inspiring.
Where was that temple?
There were several temples there.
Yeah, there's one in Mayapur, and I think there's one new in Vrindavan maybe, and I think maybe also Vrindavan.
It was definitely Vrindavan, definitely Mayapur. There's another couple. I don't know exactly where they were.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was really beautiful, and all the different deities and the devotees chanting was really nice.
Yeah.
Very inspiring, Guru. Thank you.
Nice. Happy Ekadashi. Good darshan of all.
Have a
Hare
good
Krishna,
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
stay out of the ice tomorrow.
Stay
Haribol.
safe.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Hare
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Hare